Welcome to the D&D Fitness Radio podcast, brought to you by your hosts, Don Saladino from New York City and Derek Hansen from Vancouver, Canada. In episode 54, we speak with Sean MacMillan about orthotics, shoes, and the foot. I wanted to get Sean on because I met Sean a long time ago, way back in the day, and Sean was a track athlete too, so he's been in the profession of providing orthotics and pedorthic. What is the proper term?
Yes.
Pedorthics, right? Okay, so he's a foot guy. And we had met a couple of weeks ago in Vancouver. He was down for a convention, and we were just talking about different topics around innovation, whether it be, everything from 3D printing to what's happening internationally with just looking at the foot. So I thought, this would be a great way to introduce this topic. And I know Don has a lot of questions about, what's a proper fit for a shoe, or, does everybody need orthotics? So these are some of the things that we wanted to get into.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, Sean, listen, we'd love for you to fill us in on your background a little bit, just to kind of give our listeners a little, little color on where you come from and what exactly it is you do.
Okay. Essentially, I was a track and field athlete through junior high school, really late bloomer. And once I started getting a little heavier and a little more powerful, then I got injured nonstop, and it was all Achilles issues, plantar fascia issues, shin splints, all sort of foot-related problems. And I went to a pedorthist, actually, a friend of mine who was a discus thrower on our club, but named Eldon Davey. And he looked at me and told me I lined up horrible and there was problems with my feet, and got orthotics, and it made a huge difference. I didn't have much money, as I was a walk-on for the University of Calgary Track and Field team as a sort of a sprinter. So I worked at a shoe store who had another orthotic guy, and it after I finished my first degree, I realized that it was an area that I was pretty interested in. It can do absolutely nothing and make you worse, or it can be the most life-changing, awesome, greatest experience sort of ever, changing your foot mechanics. So kind of trying to get my head around how that works and functions.
So for the everyday, individual, who has normal feet. I don't like to say normal feet.
Okay, hold it. Normal.
Yeah, normal. Exactly. What percentage of these people do you still feel like, needs an orthotic or still has to address something they're unaware of?
So, sort of at our office in Kelowna, it's called OrthoQuest. We actually have students coming from University of Western Ontario, which is our national sort of certification schooling. And what we find is we do have, and this is sort of scientific, but it's also historical, we've got certain alignment structures that would definitely need orthotics. And historically, if you see someone who's got really valgus knee alignment, really flat feet, and they're complaining about, some pretty specific things, if it's patellofemoral pain or plantar fascia pain or metatarsalgia, there's a whole list, then they're going to get and put an orthotic almost for sure, because the chances of us having success are in the high 90s. It's, people will love it. There are other people who just their feet look pretty normal, everything's looking okay, and then it becomes sort of that structural model of supporting them. I'm much less likely to do that. I'm more looking into training errors, footwear problems, which we can get in later, where their shoes just don't fit them or aren't appropriate for them. There's other factors. So it depends on the injury pattern and a whole big history. It's not just, do you have flat feet or not? That sort of paradigm, flat feet or high arch, is pretty much gone. It's not super important. So,
well, when I was, sorry, Derek, I'm going to ask this. I know I'm jumping ahead right now, but when I was, growing up, I'm not, I wouldn't necessarily call myself like a really big person. Like, I'm 6'1", but I remember at the age of 14, I had a size 14 foot.
Yeah.
That was real. Yeah, a huge feet, huge feet. and my feet were literally as flat as a pancake. And I think because of the growth spurt I was going in, who knows, my back was bothering me. They put me into some orthotics. And I remember one day I went to see an orthopedist because I was having problems with my orthotics.
Yep.
He was like, well, there's a relaxed flat foot and there's a pathological flat foot. I was so young when he ended up telling me this, but I remember these words. I don't even know if that's true or not, but he's like, just get rid of the orthotic. And I got rid of the orthotic, and I still have flat feet, but I've been moving around, and I don't really, am I sore? My back gets sore when I do specific things or when I lift.
Yeah.
This became a challenge with the orthotic because you put in a sneaker, then you got to put in a dress shoe, and then one day you want to wear sandals and all this stuff. And it's like the orthotic's made for one shoe, and you're like, that's great. That's how it was. Is it still the same way? Have we evolved since then?
We have evolved a huge amount since then.
I set you up for an easy answer there.
Yes, I love it. Yeah. So, there's a whole bunch of things I can unwrap from what you said there. So, seeing someone who's 14 years old, who's grown that much, you would know this for sure. Both of you is, posterior chain is going to be, you've grown a ton. Posterior chain is going to be really tight. Load through calves, hamstrings, glutes, low back are going to be, really high, which is going to sort of load into the arch. So it's kind of, you can do a top down sort of approach on how, where's pain coming from or soreness, or the foot up. And so you can have really flat feet that are functioning really normally and not having a problem, as you can have a normal arch that, is causing problems and injuries. So there's, we can go a long way with that. And then as far as it only fitting in one shoes, I have a shoe store now just for that reason, because I carry athletic shoes, running shoes, dress shoes, sandals, slippers, almost skateboard type shoes that all would accommodate an orthotic really easily and move from shoe to shoe. So that part has become easy. You don't have to wear a shoe that you hate, because at 14, that had that discussion on Friday where I'd rather you wear a shoe that I'm not so excited about, just so you wear these things, because they'll help you for what you got going on. So, yeah.
Interesting.
So there's I think it's around 80 competing theories on how orthotics work or don't work or function. And so back when you had yours, it was all about structure and holding an arch and making an arch and functioning. We do a lot more of the proprioception model. So mechanoreceptors in the skin, touching the arch actually is proven to change firing patterns of muscles. So how hard they fire and sort of the firing when they fire in the process. So supporting an arch will cause sort of glute med will fire better. Quads will fire in a different pattern if you change the surface underneath the foot. So the challenge around that is, of course, everybody's wired a little bit differently in how they're put together. So there's a bit of a mystery how everybody's going to respond to that.
Yeah, you had an interesting story about, somebody having a high arch support and they had a response, and I'll let you talk a bit about that. Not something that they would expect, and then can you talk a bit about how you do these adjustments? So if somebody comes back to you and says, I feel like, my stomach's upset all the time, or
okay,
yeah. How do you make that adjustment and that assessment?
So I wondered if you were going there or not. It was a good story. I've only had a mild version of this once, but my wife, who's we've both been pedorthists over 20 years. She has a client that every time they get new orthotics, he would get severe gastrointestinal distress, like diarrhea to the core. But it super fixes low back pain and all the other stuff. And so he came back for an adjustment, and she's like, "What? You have to be kidding!" So she, went through. We have a full lab where we manufacture. She took the arch height down a little bit, and he emailed us back and said, "Oh yeah, no, everything's great now. This is good." And so he wanted another pair, and he had exactly the same process again. So we do get people who are, you're pushing on stuff, and I don't have any training into that area, but we get some funny responses. And I always look at an orthotic tell clients it's not a finished product. If it just gets sent off to a lab, here it is, get used to it. we are wired differently and like pressure in different areas. And we're trying to move and squat and run and walk or with them on. And if we believe strongly in telling people that they're not loving them after 2 weeks, they need to come in and we need to talk about it and figure out what can we do to sort of change the angles, the pressure, in order to make them function at a better level. It doesn't all have to be carpenter straight like we like it to look. There can be some real sort of unusual movement patterns depending on sort of joint structure and fascial tension, and there's a lot going on there.
How much time does it take to, I'll never forget, they wanted you to break in, your feet at that time. Is it still the same process?
We still do the hour the first day, 2 hours the next day, 3 hours after that. Someone should be able to get used to it within 3-4 days, really. What I'm doing when I ask for that is, it's like going to the gym. Get all excited, work in the gym, you did very little, you're super sore, got DOMS the next day or 2 days after, you're less likely to want to go to the gym again. So with a custom orthotic or a new shoe, I don't want someone having a negative experience in the first 3-4 days that they have it. So it's why we start them with a really gradual break-in process, so that they, if they've made it a week and a half in and at 7 hours, they're finding that they're getting a bit of a blister or they're sore, they're super happy to come back into me and say, oh yeah, you were right. The left one's great. The right one, can you adjust this a bit? Where if they wear them 12 hours the first day, and they have a problem, it's really hard to get the person happy with you and trusting you and functioning. My favorite client of all time, he's a sort of an ultra distance runner, hadn't really run effectively in 3 years, had severe plantar fascia type pain and other things. And so on Friday afternoon, we gave him his orthotics, and then with a slow break in and you haven't been running for a while. So he inadvertently did a 50-mile trail race in his brand new orthotics. And I'm like, are you okay? And he said, yeah, my foot's fine, but I got a little bit of a twinge in my IT band on the other side. Do you think I need an adjustment to my orthotic? And I'm like, dude, you just ran 50 miles in a brand.
Oh, you said 50? I thought you said 15.
50 mile run.
I misheard you. I thought you said 15. I'm like, all right, well, what's
No.
50.
50. Not run in 3 years. Yeah. Anyways,
it cracks me up with some of the some of the marathon, not even marathon runners. I would say even more of the ultras, or I know a bunch of SEALs, and they'll come in and they just challenge themselves and they do things that I believe the human body's not meant to do. But they develop a level of resiliency, and sometimes they'll come. They'll be like, is there something wrong? Like my back's sore. I'm like, well, what did you run the other day? He's like, I ran 100 miles. I'm like, well, okay, like. Your back probably has a right to be sore right now, or like your ankle or your knee, or sometimes those probably, I'm a little sore, but is that all right? And I'm like, yeah, no, it's fine. He just ran 100 miles. It's unbelievable. It was that one marathon runner. Who was he? He ran a marathon every day for 30 days or something crazy, or someone, Derek, you would know that. Who was that? Was that Dean Carnazzi or something like that?
Oh yeah, there's been a bunch of people who've tried that, right? Like they're gonna run across America or run across Canada, and they're doing a marathon every day. So it's not uncommon. It's never going to be me. I'll come right out and say that. I'll never do that. But Sean, you see a lot of like marketing and advertising for just the off the shelf, insole, like, oh, I bought this insole and my back pain was cured. And what are your thoughts when you talk to clients about off the shelf products? Like, are they saying like, will this work? What's the difference between having it custom built?
Good question.
Yeah, great question. I think they're great, and before someone comes in to see me, often it's better that they've tried a product, or it's sort of a proof of concept that they're doing well. I often get people who say, all I'm comfortable in is Birkenstock sandals, but I'm really worried about wearing a pair of orthotics. And it's like, well, your Birkenstock sandals are custom or cork over-the-counter orthotics with straps attached to them. If that makes your back and legs feel better, we're on the right track. We're good. they're mass marketed. They're designed for sort of a medium average arch height. So if you have a pretty run-of-the-mill, normal-looking foot, when you look at it, it can be really effective. One of the things that I look at with patients, because I put them in over-the-counter products all the time, is does their right and left side of the body, are they fairly symmetrical? Do they have the same foot size, and are they moving in the same pattern? Often they're not. And if they are, and how specialized is the product we're putting it in, and how important is the sport? So if someone thinks they're going to make it to the Olympics as a figure skater, which I see quite a few figure skaters, and they've already spent $1,300 on their skates, and they have $750 blades there, throwing a $500 or $450 custom orthotic that's exactly tweaked to their foot is going to be worth it. So it's more foot shape. If someone has a really high arch or unusual shaped foot, then over the counter just won't work. It's a waste of their time and money. Some of the products that are sort of heat moldable are better. Oh, sorry guys. Are we there? Lost you.
Yep.
No, sorry. Got the call coming in thing, so now I know how to deal with that. So I don't know. I tend to teach people or explain things with analogies. So with glasses, if you need reading glasses and your right and left are the same, then you can get $19, $17, $18 glasses from the drugstore, and they're going to work great. It's the same thing with your feet. If you need progressive Superman Clark Kent glasses like I've got on, they're going to cost you a whole lot times 10, whatever you paid for the over-the-counter. So.
Sean, so listen, when you brought up skates, comparing skates and running shoes, are you making the same orthotic? Is it compatible? Is it like the same orthotic going in? Because I play a lot of ice hockey, and that was a problem that I had, because I was never able to transfer them over. And I think I just got discouraged at the time. It was like, all right, they fit in my sneakers and only my sneakers, but I wear a suit twice a week. And, I mean, for years, sandals used to hurt me. I found these sandals called UFOs, I think they're called, where Mike Boyle sent me a pair. They're actually, I don't know what you think about them. I'm curious. I love them. I mean, my body felt great wearing them. But what's the difference between skates and shoes? And then I have a question about male to female comparison.
Okay. So skate orthotic is completely different than a running shoe orthotic. So a running shoe orthotic won't fit in there. So if I've got an athlete that, I get a lot of guys who are 35, 40 years old. They play rep hockey in the evening. I say Superfeet's a brand that makes a really good over-the-counter sort of orthotic that'll fit in there. And then we worry about their day-to-day. What are they wearing most of the time when they're sort of moving, and that sort of can act as sort of a recovery from what they're doing with hockey. If they're playing hockey 3, 4, 5 times a week, then we need something. If we've tried the over-the-counter product, then we need to go with something custom. The only way to do them properly is to have the skate and the sort of cast of the foot and the orthotic and grind it directly to fit in that skate. They're all a little bit different, and you're basically doing art trying to fit a rounded sort of surface into another surface that has contours and roundness to it. So they're fairly complicated to make, but when you dial it in, it makes an enormous difference.
So say this. So someone's based away from Vancouver. They don't work with you. They don't have access to you.
Yeah.
Are they able to still go through that process? So use me for an example. I'm going to buy a new pair of skates. I want to get my orthotics. Do I need to find a podiatrist that's local to be able to do this, or could we work with someone like you?
Right now, that is the best way to do it. I work with a lot of people where they will fly in to see me, or I'm in that city and we work it, and I find out, get the info I need, and then can mail it back to them and function fairly well. But the ideal is definitely to be working somewhere in your area where they can get in and make changes and see what's happening. There's lots of technology where they're really trying to take a scan of your foot and then make you an orthotic, scan with your phone and away you go. It just doesn't give you the level of precision that you need to make it function well for you.
Yeah. Interesting. And how about
So you'll have to fly me into to see you.
So now discussing male and female. Body structure. I mean, just structurally we move differently. You know, we wear different shoes. I mean, I know in my business, you deal with a lot of women who wear a lot of heels on, it sounds funny, but on the red carpet, just the position it puts their foot into, which puts their low back into a specific position. That's unavoidable. I mean, it just has to get to a point where how do you even help that? I mean, you're already in such a position that's, you know, not the best thing for the body. How do you answer that question? Or can you fix it?
Well, the typical answer in my industry is, are they 1, 2, or 3 glass of wine shoes for the red carpet? So you're going to be in discomfort no matter what. Mm-hmm. But there's some typical patterns that we see. So if someone has to wear that, you've given an example where they have to wear that shoe. It's part of their job, it's part of their function. So telling them to wear an ugly running shoe isn't going to get you very far. So, you know, I'd be working with someone like that, definitely working on sort of gastroc and soleus, you know, flexibility, make sure that they're counterbalancing that in their day-to-day life. There are some, depending on the shoe, sometimes they can add a little cushion, or there's some modifications to be done there, and making sure that the shoes actually pitch properly. So some of them actually, there are techniques in shoe manufacturing that allow someone to wear a heel more comfortably. You know, difference between men and women besides shoes, just structurally, we're much more likely to have sort of metatarsal splay or a wider forefoot. They always say they have a narrow heel. They've usually just got a wider forefoot. That gets worse with really tight calves and wearing high-heeled shoes. You get a lot more splay of the structure through there. We're more likely to, of course, have genu valgum with a sort of the Q angle of the hip is often higher. It's not always, but, you know, so we definitely see a lot more, not a lot, probably about 70% female clients and 30%, and that it varies depending on the area you live in, but that's more common. We're also much more likely for orthotics for a woman to say you need 2 or 3 pairs. The shoes you're wearing are, the shoe you're wearing for CrossFit is going to be different than the shoe you're wearing in boot camp is going to be different than what you're running in versus what you're wearing as a flight attendant or whatever. So we need to support them in the different areas that they're in. So
yeah, I had more questions about that. Like if you have somebody who's, and again, you've probably seen these, like you have somebody who's a tennis player, you have somebody who's a soccer player, a football athlete, different shoes, cleats. And obviously the shoe companies are capitalizing on like, this is sport specific. Do you have to have that same level of sport specificity around making sure you can support that shoe and the types of movements? Like basketball is going to be different than, rugby or, things like that. Do you dive into those things and really try to customize?
Yeah. So some of it's the sport they're doing, and then also is their sort of their injury history. So a really common one with a basketball player that I would do is there actually is a prescription with orthotics where you line the foot up. So as they come off the forefoot, you try to actually pronate them a little bit. So you put a lateral wedge under the 4th and 5th metatarsal head in order, if they have a history of spraining, which they're going to, inversion sprain they're going to have in that sport, is we can actually align the orthotic in a way that it is working more with, cutting laterally and moving. Of course, making sure they're in a shoe that isn't just a fashion basketball shoe, that some of them are genius the way they make the logo fit into the lateral flare to keep them from spraining, and other ones it just makes no sort of anatomical sense for their sport, and it's the coolest new shoe. So what about so I haven't been I'd say 90% of my training takes place barefooted. Yep.
I own my own gym in New York City. It's clean. I'm just comfortable. I start my workouts with some breathing. I roll the bottom of my feet. I'll get my toes into extension. I try and work on some dexterity in the toes, and I'm just comfortable. Like I just get better body awareness when I'm doing like lunging and squatting. I know how I just can feel the ground a little bit better, but my feet are flat. And
Exactly.
What's your thought process on that? Are you for it or are you against it?
Well, you've sort of explained that you're more so there's a lot of studies around there. So gentleman, actually Derek brought him in for one of his talks in Canada here, Ben O'Nig, who's University of Calgary. It's like the comfort filter paradigm is what he calls it. And when you buy shoes or go barefoot, the point is that you go with what is comfortable, and that's shown to often be biomechanically correct with you. So you have a flat foot, and so being barefoot, you are going to feel the ground much better. Where if you have someone who's got a really high arch, they're only making contact on the met heads and the heel, filling in up underneath that arch gives them probably that same sensation that you're getting being flat on the floor. So
and that's perfect. And that's perfect. And that's a perfect segue into my next question, because the foot being flat or seeing that arch collapse, I've spoken to some different therapists with different opinions, and there's specific therapists saying, you want to try and move the floor and you want to try and create an arch. And I've had other therapists, really smart guys that I respect, say, no, let the arch collapse. It's okay. Like be careful about what the knees are doing. Where do we go with this? I mean, is it, what's your opinion?
I think that going through and sort of exercising feet and being aware of it is important, and most people have pretty good strength in their feet. Actually, when I test them and do things, they're not sort of disabled and have dysfunction from wearing shoes. Now, if you're on the red carpet all the time, you can do some pretty good damage, but most patients I see have pretty good functioning shoes, and they're exercised from now to the end of the time. I've never seen someone do toe crunches and build themselves an arch. There's sort of a lot of literature and sort of researchers that I've met and know and looked at their stuff. And doming is a thing which is a great exercise to, you basically sort of put your foot down and try to push down your first metatarsal and invert a bit and create an arch and suction cup. But they expect you could, and then you start jumping off boxes and trying to hold your arch and have no collapse. And pronation is kind of a triplanar motion, and is designed to absorb shock. It's there to let you adapt to the ground and function. So I don't think it's unhealthy. You do get issues around sort of tissue tolerance. So some people have the ugliest, gnarliest, most pronated feet that you've ever seen. And they'll run do an Ironman one day, and then they'll go do another thing the next day, and their feet never bother them. They just recover really well. And there's people that have, normal pronation and supination, and they have a normal foot function, and they're in pain all the time. And there's a colleague of mine, Colin Dombrowski, who owns, I think, about 17 or 18 clinics on Ontario, Canada. He does a talk about, don't forget about the pretty feet too. Because sometimes they yep, you got a good arch, you're good to go. And, the person can't do the sports or the activities they want for years because it gets neglected. And you put them in an over-the-counter product for $50, and it's genius. It works really well. So sometimes it's about your recovery rates and how it's often training errors, but all we want to make sure is we allow people to train normally and help them recover. An example with arches collapsing is ballerinas that I've worked with. You can't go in a ballet once they hit in point as well. You can't put anything in there and really have it function. So they're going to dance with no support, especially jazz and split sole shoes and stuff like that. And what the schools make them do is wear orthotics when they are not dancing, so that they're supported and the tissue has a chance to recover and heal. And it's considered a recovery orthotic rather than what you do while you do your sport, because the incidence in some sports of injuries to the feet is so high that you want to do anything. You're always overloading the tissue and the structure, and you just want to give them a break.
That's interesting. The whole flat foot thing is interesting because I have flat feet. Don and it's the Flat Foot podcast here.
All right. Okay. I'm not in your store there, but yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, I'll speak for Don, but Don was athletic. I was pretty athletic. Yeah. And, I always wondered about the flat foot thing, like, oh, it was probably a way to get out of being drafted to go to Vietnam or something. But
Yeah.
what's the whole point behind it? It sounds like what you're saying is that it's almost like an evolutionary thing where some people have flat feet because it works for them, whereas some people have an arch and it works for them. And you now have to become a bit of an artist around diagnosing who needs what. And at the same time, like, is there a science behind this? Because it seems like it's all over the map.
A little bit of it is the longer you do something, the more the more exceptions to the rule you see. So it does, as time goes on, I come across it as more wishy-washy on my answers on things, unfortunately. But, you've got flat feet that are, as Don, as you were saying, you can have flat feet and all the joints are functioning normal, and it's just a description of your foot shape. And trying to create an arch there isn't going to do you any good. More commonly, we see real sort of ligament laxity and general sort of laxity situations where, we're seeing, I'm checking feet, the feet, and things are seeming hypermobile with testing. And then as they lean back on my sort of plinth, their elbows are hyperextending and they're clearly, hips are hypermobile. And when we get someone who's hypermobile, the point is we want to make the whole structure, we want to stabilize the structure. So if showing my age, if when I learned to drive, it was in a big old station wagon, and every bump you hit, it kept bouncing down. That's because my parents didn't do proper care on my station wagon, but turn the wheel around 3 times to turn the corner, 4 times the lane change even. It's just a really soft structure. And if you put a new better structure on it, it work better. And some people are put together like race cars, where every little motion they have is really, everything's really tightly put together. And they feel every pebble and move differently. And it's figuring out what kind of a rigid flat arch doesn't tolerate any support. It doesn't do very well with it, and it makes it function worse, where a flexible foot often feels better with some stability, whether that's strengthening in a muscular or a footwear or different proprioception with an orthotic or an insole. But it's not just looking at visually the shape. It's doing some functional movement screens or other things to find out how the person moves as a human being.
Is getting back to the ballerina example, when you said, what did you say? The school was having the ballerinas wear the orthotics for recovery.
Yeah.
That was actually my next question. Is that enough? So take someone who is, because listen, this can get very costly, right? And I'm sure insurance is not going to cover 4 pairs of orthotics at $500 a pop or whatever it might cost. So this is something that's costly, and the average American probably can't afford this. Is it enough though to get 1 pair and say you work, you're on your feet, and like I'm on my sneakers 12 hours a day wearing them at work? Is that enough just to wear them then? Am I going to see a benefit from wearing them, not having a pair made for my skates, or not having a pair made for my sandals or my dress shoes? If I'm wearing them 12 hours a day, 5-6 days a week, I've eliminated a good portion of the week. Is that going to screw me up, or is that going to help me out?
It's going to help you out a ton. I'm not a believer you have to have them in every second of the day. When someone has a specific injury, then you're going to want to wear them as much as you possibly can to help calm tissue down, get it feeling better. And then once that happens, you can start cheating a little bit and find out where your threshold is. And I would rather a person wear it 8-10 hours a day and cheat the rest of the time than it's rare for me to make someone 3, 4, 5 things, but it does depend on what your occupation is, what sports you do. And there are some people that it just makes sense to load them up everywhere, and they're usually willing to do it. But I have a nurse that I work with who loves more minimalist shoe. She's, having metatarsal stress fractures and Achilles problems all the time running. And she just does not like wearing anything heavier on her feet. She's a nurse though. So she works 12-hour days. And I said, well, would you wear an orthotic or an arch support at work? And she's like, oh yeah, no problem. That would be great. And so she's pre-fatiguing all the intrinsic muscles of her feet and alignment. And once you go over 8-10 hours on your feet, things start functioning worse and they're not as effective. And so she was a great example. I wanted to see how she responded. Running was no problem. Once we took her, she was pre-fatiguing everything in her 12-hour work shifts. So it's a great example is as long as you cover, my guess is would be similar as nutrition. As long as you're 90% of the time taking care of things, doing all the basics that you need to.
It's a good example.
You can cheat anytime you want. That's fine. And there are some people who can cheat an awful lot and do really well with their nutrition and physique and how they feel. And there's other people who just the way they're put together, cheating a little bit makes a big difference. So there's some variation from person to person there, but that would probably be the best way to describe it.
Huh.
Oh, it's great. So when I come to New York, Don and I can wear high heels when we go out.
Don't send me pictures, guys.
Now you're speaking my language, Derek.
So let's talk about shoes. You say somebody comes to you, and obviously now you have a shoe store as part of it. How about that? How much do you have to guide people to buy the right shoes and give them the right advice? Because you can have, I'll go to the local sports store and I get the teenager telling me about a neutral foot versus whatever, and I'm like, okay, you're just reading the script here. But how much guidance do people need when they buy their shoes and making sure that is first nailed down before you put an orthotic in it? Do I need more cushioning? Do I need a more rigid shoe? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So what I start with shoes is going over just basic fit. So we have very old school Brannick devices, the little measuring tools. They don't tell you how big your feet are, like your actual foot size, but they give us what's the difference between right and the left, what is the fit. And then we go through really basic things. Like if you're in an athletic shoe, you need about a thumb off the end of your longest toe, whether it's your first or you've got a Morton's toe and it's your second toe. You need to have the first metatarsal hitting at the widest point or the rock point of the shoe. Those are really the most sort of important starting points to make sure that if you're pulling the laces right together, that's a sign that, it's too much volume for your foot if they're splayed way apart. So we start with basic fit first, and most people haven't been fit with a shoe that actually is correct on their foot. And a lot of times we're talking orthotics and we put them in a good shoe and it's fit wise and it feels so different than what they're used to that we start with that, and that's enough to make things feel better. Often in my industry, we're looking for shoes that have a bit of a rocker sole. So we're trying to improve sort of sagittal plane motion, and we're trying to sort of offload Achilles or plantar fascias or met heads. And so we're looking for rockers a lot of times. We do get people who feel too tip forward with that. So that's not really the athletic population, but often it's the little old lady with the kind of call it the Carol Burnett shuffle. So her nose is a foot and a half in front of her toes and she's leaned over. You put someone in a shoe that rocks someone forward like that, they're not going to like you a lot, and they need a flatter shoe. So we're looking at those things. There's a whole bell curve on what people need. So there are people who doesn't have to do with high arch or flat feet. If they've got very stable feet that function well and are not in pain, we want them to have a more flexible foot, that shoe that just functions and covers their foot. And that's about 5 to 10% of the population really excel in that type of shoe. That's not usually who I'm seeing in my clinic as a patient, because they can put anything they want on their foot and they feel comfortable. So that's not who I would see, but they definitely are out there. Most people just need a neutral shoe with a little bit of cushioning and that fits them properly, and a fairly stable heel counter on the shoe, and they do really well. We've got the whole pronation control shoe was about 60% in the 80s and 90s. That was the cure-all to everything. It didn't work for everyone, and that's going out of favor currently. But and they're going more with insoles, but there's probably 20% of the population who excels in a motion control shoe and does really well. And on the other side of the scope, there's people who like really minimalist stuff and low heel drop things. With shoes, we got whole new categories. So the whole maximalist shoes that everybody's doing. And then we also, we'll get into that. Carbon fiber plates are the new thing for everyone who's distance runners right now. That are completely different categories, and lovely. People get to be guinea pigs for the big shoe companies on how they're going to respond to those. Not a lot of good research yet. We know you can run faster, but it changes injury patterns as well.
You know, I actually have two questions I'm going to throw at you. One's going to probably be a quick answer, but how long do they last? So what's the life expectancy on these orthotics?
On an orthotic? So, if you go with a sort of a typical podiatry style orthotic, which is usually sort of graphite materials or polypropylenes, it's a sort of a flexible plastic. They usually last sort of 5 to 7 years. I've seen them last 10. The big problem is your injury pattern or your prescription usually changes in that time. So even if it fits you, you can put new covers on them, you can repair them, they can last a really long time, but often sort of your needs or things change. A soft orthotic, EVA is a really common material that we use here. It's what your shoes are made of, your running shoes are made of. I've got clients who get 2-3 years out of them. I've got a massage therapist that works with me who's done Transalp run, I think 3 times in the same pair of soft EVA orthotics. And I've got an appointment with her on Friday to maybe replace those, as she's going to do that again this year. But yeah, they're quite durable, actually. That's one of the things is some of the over-the-counter ones, the Dr. Scholl's and stuff are so soft that they wear out in 6 to 8 weeks, and then you get sore again, and you spend $30-$40 and buy another pair, and people often have 10 pairs, and they have them numbered when they come into my office, and they've spent way more money over the last year than they have with me getting a custom orthotic that lasts them 5-6 years. So it's kind of funny. Value versus cost. Is
the goal, because you hear about different cultures and different runners, as children, they never, they couldn't afford sneakers. Yep. And they ran, barefooted on a beach, and everything they do was barefooted. And for some, obviously, I guess it's just that level of resiliency. I mean, what I was taught, I guess this is not really a statement, but more of a question. I was always taught that you're taking a perfectly healthy foot, and you're technically throwing a cast on it for 10 to 14 hours a day, whatever you really wear. And it makes sense. I'm like, all right, well, no wonder you lose, proprioception and dexterity in your toes, and then the ankles stop moving a specific way. And for years, I remember, people were saying, I want a shoe, a sneaker with more support. But is it really the other way? I mean, what is your opinion now? If you were to take a child and just say, you know what, we're going to make sure that you just wear sneakers and shoes minimally, are they setting themselves up for more success into the future? Granted, they don't break their foot banging it on something.
That's stepping on.
Putting that aside.
Yeah, that stuff aside. With kids, the current thoughts right now with is my understanding with pediatricians and stuff is the less you do with a foot before someone's 5, the better it is. You're just wanting them to adapt to the ground and feel things and move forward. There are kids that they're just outside of the norm. They're outliers and need more. I saw a client on Friday, 20 months old, didn't walk yet. I said, I don't carry kids' shoes, so I sent her off for some flexible little runners and put a little wedge in the left side, and she let go of things and started walking around my office like it. And when you have an outlier like that that's struggling, getting in and doing something is the best thing you can do for them. But I would say for the vast majority of kids, leaving their feet alone and wearing like less supportive, wider fitting shoes is the way that you go. It's the way I went with both my kids. As far as cultures in a whole, going barefoot, that became really popular with the Born to Run book. Dan Lieberman is sort of an anthropologist who got published around that running barefoot and sort of the advantages to that. I have a clinic here in Canada that's up in the Northwest Territories. So I think it's the northernmost orthotic clinic in North America. And there's a lot of Inuit people and the Dene people who many of the elders have only ever worn moccasins or mucklucks or other things. And I have a very busy practice up there with bunions and sore feet and torn tibialis posterior tendons and plantar fasciitis, and their feet hurt just as much as the rest of us. So I was at a conference in Calgary about 6 years ago, an international, was having a beer. Dan Lieberman was there. I said, hey, I've got a clinic up north. It'd be great if you did a study. I'm seeing tons of problems with these feet. Because, his assertion was cultures he's been to across the world that don't wear shoes have no foot problems. And so I made a kind offer that I try to hook him up with someone up there. And he turned around and walked away from me and wanted no more of that discussion.
Didn't even respond to you.
No, he turned his tail and walked, and there was a group of us there who all just sort of shook our heads. So I wasn't challenging him or being mean. I was like, is this an outlier community or is there a difference? And he didn't want an example of a community that didn't wear our commercialized shoes and still had foot problems. He didn't want any part of that discussion or a study. So, yeah.
It's interesting because I remember when the Vibram Five Fingers came out, and the minimalistic shoe, and it's got to be, I'm feeling like probably within the last 10 to 15 years. Yeah. I remember Vibrams came out, and I remember, I still have a pair of them. Actually, to be honest with you, I actually love them.
Because you're the candidate for them. You're one of the guys.
Spokesperson.
Yeah, you're the spokesperson.
What was interesting is it's interesting how someone wants to flip to the other side of the coin so quickly, and they're talking about research and barefoot training, and then out of nowhere someone goes out and they're like, oh well, I wore the Five Fingers for 8 miles and I tore my Achilles, and I'm like, well, you idiot. It's a perfect example of your friend who ran 50 miles. 8 miles for, a runner who's not used to it. Like, no shit, you tore your Achilles. Like, I'm surprised that's all you ended up doing. So, and then it gets a bad rap and people are walking around saying Five Fingers are bad. So all in all, I guess the reason for my statement there is you are for it. You are for barefoot training. Granted, the individual doesn't have any major issues and you're recommending that they take their time getting into it.
It's being sensible and not making training errors. At our sort of national Pedorthic conference this year, and I wish I had the name of the researcher, it doesn't come to me, but they've kind of gone back and wanted to do more studies around barefoot because we've moved. At the time you had those Vibram Five Fingers, 57% of the shoes on the market were minimalist of some kind. It was really popular. Right now it's less than 5%.
Oh, wow.
We've got less than 5%. There's a gentleman named Blaise Dubois, who's a physio, and he's a big barefoot proponent in Canada. And I talked to sort of a shoe store owner that on 2 weekends ago that works with him a lot. And apparently, I can't, this is secondhand, but I guess Blaise can't find any barefoot shoes on the market. It's less than 3% of the shoes on the market.
Why
the other way? And so he's wanting to go to the, to factories to see if someone can make him some barefoot shoes because it is right for some people. Oh, sorry. Back to the study. At the last thing is they're really liking barefoot shoes more for walking stuff and definitely moved away from running. So the study that I can't remember the research on it, so I feel bad, but it's a real study, I promise. It was they took runners and tried to transition them slowly into a barefoot shoe. The time frame was all reasonable, and they did imaging and found severe bone marrow bruising in the metatarsals and the foot. They had to shut down the study for the safety of the runners transitioning into barefoot shoes. So, I mean, there's definitely that transition is a hard one, and I've got clients who want to go more minimalist, and we're definitely getting stress fractures and injuries, and met stress fractures, navicular fractures are the common ones, and then sort of plantar fascia, Achilles, not the injuries with rocks and glass and other stuff, but yeah. there's pros and cons to it.
Yeah.
So, go ahead, Derek. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I found like my kids, like we were talking about the kids, my kids really like wearing Converse All-Stars. Like maybe it was just because they look cool or something, but they wore them, they would run, they would do stuff in them. And I'm like, okay, that's good. And then UFO sent me some of those sandals too, which had a bit of a high arch, but they were soft enough that it kind of conformed to my foot a bit better. So it wasn't like I was getting diarrhea from the high arch or anything like that. But, and then the last, the last comment I wanted to, I don't want to be incontinent because of my shoes. The last comment was, I read this article that was up and it talked about, over 50% of Kenyan runners are taking EPO. So it's not the barefoot running. So it's just interesting how people kind of assess stuff and go like, you're either over here or you're over here, but there's no, in the middle. So
there's a lot of in the middle people where multiple things would work. Unfortunately, my daughter likes wearing Converse as well, which by all accounts are, you think that vulcanized rubber came out in the 1950s? Maybe. Anyways, those were basketball shoes at the time. It's a fashion thing, and they have such good recovery and tissue tolerance that they get away with things. Most adults do not function as well in those shoes as kids do. They seem to get away with a lot.
My last comment, I mean, as a weightlifter, you hear a lot of guys who squat and deadlift to talk about how they like wearing Cons because they're a flat sole sneaker.
Yeah.
I absolutely hate it. I mean, I don't know, I want to explain why. It's such a narrow shoe that I can't splay my feet. And when I'm using the floor, I want to splay my feet. Exactly. Yet it's turning around and it's crunching my toes together. So even when I'm doing any type of unilateral work, one-legged work, I feel like it's that much more difficult for me to balance, and not in a good way, not in a way where I would say, oh, well, these idiots out there are like, well, get on an unstable surface. Like, no, like it's difficult enough for me to balance. Now you're crunching my toes together. I can't use my feet the way that I want to use them. And in my opinion, I actually think it's bad for me, but you're saying that you pretty much agree. You don't think it's a great sneaker to begin with, correct?
It's not. Canvas is not the best material to make an upper of a shoe out. It doesn't flex or mold with the foot. That, what you said comes back to a shoe fit thing. I mean, I can see your face and your upper torso. I can't see your feet, but you've obviously got a wider foot and it's just not fitting you properly. The shape of it or the fit is not functioning well. If I'm doing any kind of Olympic lifting, I have such a restriction in my ankles that I don't do well in a flat shoe that a lot of people lift in. I need a proper lifting shoe with that bit of a heel height, or I'm going to hurt myself or fall backwards with the bar, or, really, just not get proper alignment. So,
right.
It was interesting that Don had mentioned how his feet can't splay. And I was talking to somebody who was involved with high-level soccer, and he said a lot of the top players want a shoe that's like 2 sizes too small so that they can feel the ball, but then they have all these injuries because of it.
Yeah, and the interesting with injury on that is the intrinsic in the foot, one of the purposes of them, they've shown recently, is it's a signal when there's tension on the intrinsics in the foot, it signals the quads to fire. So as your foot hits the ground, you get that forefoot splay that you're talking about, Don. It actually signals your quads to turn on at the right time. And it's part of that timing. If you're sprinting or, playing soccer, if your shoes are that tight, you are impairing the function and the neuromuscular coordination and timing of the body. So that's kind of new things that they're starting to understand how important that is.
Wow.
I'm thinking about ACLs.
What about with hockey then? Because technically the hockey skate is supposed to be much smaller. Like my skates, I've been skating my whole life, but my skates, I've always worn big skates, and at times when I try and move laterally, I can feel them get a little sloppy. So I'm a 14 foot, I'd wear a 13 skate, which is still way too big in accordance to hockey standards. I have a friend who's a 14, he wears an 11 and a half skate. So I'm thinking So what do you
so skating would go skates, downhill ski boots, like road cycling cleats. They're considered fixed foot sports. So you're not, it's a segment that you're attaching to the rest and you're attaching something else to it. So you're wanting as much control onto that edge as you want. So you're not, it's a different push through motion that you're doing.
So the tighter the better.
Externally eroding. So tighter is better to a point. Like there's a point where, you know, your toes are going blue and but tighter is better in that sport. Soccer is an example where you do need tighter in order to move laterally and function. But I would argue that, you know, in rugby and football, which have generally a looser shoe, you're doing the same cutting and moving patterns. So that is a tendency that it's the culture around the sport is that you need really tight shoes. People have been wanting to redesign soccer shoes for a really long time.
Right.
But the sport just won't allow a lot of change in that way.
Well, Sean, listen, that was an hour already. I don't even know, where the time went. That was pretty incredible. And thank you so much. Could you do us a favor though? Could you let our listeners know if they want to get in contact with you, if they're in the Vancouver area and they want to come in for a fitting? How do they reach out to you? Can you give us that info?
Yeah, sure. So OrthoQuest is our company. So, I mean, of course, you can the only other OrthoQuest in the world is a denture lab down in Texas. So if you want dentures, go that OrthoQuest. The OrthoQuest is mine. We're in Kelowna, BC, and which is, just a short 3-hour drive, 4-hour drive out of Vancouver. I don't mind people reaching out to me, Sean at orthoquest.ca. We also, if you look at OrthoQuest on Facebook or on Instagram, you can have a look at what we're doing.
Awesome. Well, listen, thank you again. And obviously, if you're ever up in the New York area, I'd love you to come by. We'd love to meet. And really appreciate all the info. I know, Derek, I had a lot of good takeaways from that today. I don't know about you.
Cool.
Like flat foot. Having a flat foot is good, Don. That's what I took away from it.
I'm happy. You understand? You just up my confidence. So 42 is my life.
New York, I need to bring my high-heeled shoes. Is that what you're saying?
That too.
That's what I got from this event. I don't know. We'll see.
It's amazing. Well, Sean, listen, thank you again. Derek, as always, thank you. That was a pleasure. And we'll be touching base soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, guys.
Okay, bye.
Bye.